entity to the already contentious Australian Human Rights Commission. Plus, taxpayer support for gender-affirming medical technologies. Their language, not mine, and calls for the identification options on birth certificates to be well beyond male and female. I have to say that's even if we'll still have the option of male and female in the future, because we know in Tasmania, birth certificates are now gender-free. When we discussed this issue a few weeks ago, I was overwhelmed with viewers who said they were angry to hear about these plans and wondered why not enough people in the media were discussing it. I said then I'd come back to the issue, and tonight I'm joined by a medical expert, paediatric Professor John Whitehall from Western Sydney University, albeit he's here in a private capacity, who studied this detail very closely. Thanks for your time, very much appreciated tonight. I know you're busy. This is a really important issue. I have to say, other than a few comment pieces in the newspapers and you bravely coming and speaking about it, I think most Australians are concerned, but don't know the detail.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you talk about the platform. The platform is not a suggestion of what they're going to do. It's a promise of what they're going to do. And part of that promise is that they will have a nationwide safe schools program, which is, in fact, in my opinion, part of the problem, because under the issue of bullying, and nobody approves of that, they are raising this ideology that there is no fixed identity as a boy or a girl, but the children of the working class exist somewhere on a flexible rainbow, some kind of a locus in between. And that if a child then expresses confusion and the delusion that the boy might think he's a girl, they have promised that they will make it illegal for a doctor or a therapist or a counsellor or whatever, illegal to do anything but to direct and support the child in the direction of the new gender.
So can I just jump in and ask you, so if you have a child who's, say, 7, who presents and says, I'm a boy, or I'm into what I would call a tomboy, or a boy who thinks that they might be a girl, rather than perhaps involve counselling or a psychologist, as the parent, as the paediatrician, what you have to then now support that choice of the child at 7 or 8 or 5 or whatever it might be, to change their gender. Am I right?
Yes, indeed, you are right. This is the issue. They use the weasel word conversion. In other words, you are not allowed, it will be illegal, forbidden, at the pain of deregistration or whatever. They were actually going to criminalise it, but thought that they could make it more effective if they used civil laws to prohibit a doctor, for example. They use the word converting the child back to the gender with which it was born.
So that wasn't my idea of a conversion therapy, was very different than that, but that would involve just something as simple as counselling, a doctor.
Oh, well, exactly. That's all that there used to be, and it was very, very effective. And indeed, throughout the world, the statistics are that the majority of children will, in fact, revert to the gender of birth. Now, some along the way will end up as homosexual, and I can understand the homosexual community is saying that transgendering these children, making them ersatz females in the case of a boy, is in fact gay genocide. I can see that. And Zucker, who was an international export in Canada, was basically sacked. His unit was closed down for observing that surely life as a homosexual was less complicated than a medicalised, surgicalised, castrated, lobotomized, transgendered child. For that, he was closed down.
So tell me about the risks here, because the operations to change gender, going into the medical, surgical world, but obviously also all the hormone treatments, so many of those are irreversible on young people. You can't come back from a mastectomy, you can't come back from genital surgery. How much of a risk is this? Would we be making those decisions on young people under this policy?
Well, we already are, and this is another weasel word. You mentioned mastectomies. Mastectomies are allowed by the law under the concept that they are reversible. This is nonsense. They're only reversible in a cosmetic sense because of silicone bags. It's got nothing to do with breastfeeding or everything. That's what gets under my skin, is the dissembling, the massaging of truth, the telling of lies. For example, before the surgery, there is the blocking of puberty with various drugs. They say this is safe and entirely reversible. People are taking no notice of the sustained research which has been done in Glasgow and in Norway, which has shown that if you give prepubertal or peripubertal sheep the blockers, their limbic systems are altered, which is the integrating behavioral, emotional, coordinating center of the brain. The bit of the brain that would help you work out whether you're male or female is irreparably damaged by blocking with the blockers. 100 genes upregulated, 100 genes downregulated. The whole business gets pathologically bigger. And the sheep, and he's surprised the sheep is more emotionally labile and has a bad memory. I don't know how they test these things out. I'm not good at sheep. But all this is there. All this is there. And it has been repeated. And yet the pundits arguing for the transgendering of children saying, it's safe and effects are entirely reversible. This is not true.
But what parent wants their child to be an experiment, a gender experiment?
Well, there are indications. For example, in the past, there was an Australian psychiatrist named Koski who was head of psychiatry in Western Australia, and he reviewed the cases from 75 to 80 and published them. There were 8 cases, only 8. Now the same hospital gets 2 or 3 a week. Koski basically put the child in a hospital, and with a dramatically short space of time, the child gave away or gave up on this hypersexualized feminine behavior, mostly they're boys. He came to the conclusion that this was a symbiotic relationship of pathology between the mother and the boy in this case. Okay, she's hardly done by males. She doesn't particularly get on with the little boy, finds that life is easier when he's in a dress. He finds that when he's in a dress, mum's eyes light up, and it goes on from then. So that's part of it, family psychology, and it was treated by family and individual psychology.
This goes to the point we started the conversation on. If somehow under these rules, and you're right, they're not a nice to do that we could think about doing, they are mandatory if Labor comes into power, it's part of their platform. Psychology in these discussions and counselling before these big radical decisions are made is gone. So too, I understand, is us even talking about things.
Yes, I hope you enjoy this because it's the last chance we have. If Labor get in, it has promised in the platform, not my platform, that they will regulate broadcasts. We won't be able to have a cynical conversation on this so-called conversion therapy. It will be banned. They promise.
But this is the concern I have. You know, I've worked in politics for a long time. We're trying to go through in an election campaign and discuss these issues, policies right across the board, so that the voters have a chance to look at them and be informed when they go to vote. No one's really talking about this issue, and you're a paediatrics professor. What you're saying tonight to parents at home watching this would be pretty alarming, to say the least.
I don't know why it hasn't been raised. You know what? In Victoria, they have basically said this conversion therapy will be illegal, and now, not now, they reversed the onus of proof, and nobody seems to care about that. They say that you are guilty, the doctor, therapist, will be guilty until he can prove innocence. Nobody seems to care that this enormous fundamental of democracy has been traduced down there. Now, Hennessy, the health minister, it's all in Hansard. There's a paragraph in Hansard. You need a couple of PhDs to understand it. But at the end, she basically says, yes, this is not a human rights issue. We have reversed the onus of proof, and it's important now. So all sorts of things have happened without comment.
Well, Professor Whitehall, thank you very much for coming on tonight and at least informing people at home a little bit about what's at stake in the next few weeks.
More of this and you'll get me